Celeste Morgan had perfected the art of being invisible. At 28, she moved through the world like a whisper, her presence so gentle that people often forgot she was there until they needed something. She worked at the downtown public library, where she spent her days organizing books that held more adventures than she'd ever experienced herself. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she favored cardigans in muted colors that helped her blend into the background. Celeste had convinced herself that this was exactly how she liked it. Being noticed meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability led to disappointment. "You're coming tonight, and I won't take no for an answer," Nina declared, bursting into the library's quiet reference section like a hurricane in designer heels. Her best friend since college had a way of disrupting Celeste's carefully ordered world with the force of her personality. Celeste looked up from the stack of returned books she was processing. "Nina, I already told you I'm not really the charity gala type. All those people, all that small talk. That's exactly why you need to come," Nina insisted, perching on the edge of Celeste's desk. "When was the last time you did something that scared you a little? When did you last wear something that wasn't beige or gray?" The question stung because Celeste couldn't remember. After her father's death 3 years ago, she'd retreated further into her shell. Her mother had moved to Florida, leaving Celeste alone in the city she'd always called home, and quieter in response. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that," Celeste said, which was true, but also an excuse. Nina's eyes lit up with the determination that had made her successful. "In public relations? Leave that to me. We're the same size, and I have the perfect dress. Something tells me tonight is going to be special." 2 hours later, Celeste stood in front of her bedroom mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress Nina had brought was a deep emerald green that somehow made her hazel eyes look more vibrant. It wasn't revealing, but it fit her in a way that suggested she had curves she usually kept hidden. Nina had also insisted on doing her makeup, keeping it natural but adding just enough to make her features more defined. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Celeste murmured, tugging at the hem nervously. "You look like yourself, just braver," Nina corrected. "Trust me on this. Sometimes we need to dress the part before we can become the person we're meant to be." The charity gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum, and as their taxi pulled up to the entrance, Celeste felt her stomach flip. Beautiful people in expensive clothes glided up the steps like they belonged in this world of wealth and influence. She definitely did not belong here. "Remember," Nina whispered as they joined the crowd moving toward the entrance, "you're not here to impress anyone. You're here to experience something new. Just observe. Just be present." The museum had been transformed into something magical. Soft lighting highlighted the artwork, and elegant arrangements of white flowers created intimate conversation areas throughout the space. Servers moved gracefully through the crowd with champagne and delicate appetizers that looked too pretty to eat. Celeste accepted a glass of sparkling water and found a spot near a Renaissance painting where she could watch the crowd without being in the middle of it. She was good at observing people, at noticing the small details others missed. The way a woman touched her necklace when she was nervous. How a man's smile never quite reached his eyes when he was networking rather than genuinely connecting. That's when she saw him. Adrian Blackwell stood near the center of the room, surrounded by people who clearly wanted his attention. Celeste recognized him from newspaper articles and magazine covers. He was the tech genius who'd built a software empire before turning 30, known for creating programs that helped connect people across the globe. Ironically, he was famous for being intensely private himself. He was taller than she'd expected, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his hands through it and sharp features that photographs didn't quite capture. But what struck her most was how isolated he seemed despite being surrounded by people. There was something in his posture, a subtle tension, that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. As she watched, a woman in a glittering gold dress monopolized his conversation, laughing too loudly at something he'd said. Adrian's smile was polite but distant, and Celeste noticed how his gaze kept drifting around the room, as if looking for an escape route. Their eyes met across the crowded space. For a moment, everything else seemed to fade into the background. Celeste felt her breath catch as Adrian's expression shifted from polite boredom to something more focused, more present. He was looking at her, really looking, and she felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. She looked away quickly, her cheeks burning. When she glanced back, he was still watching her, but now there was the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then someone claimed his attention again, and the spell was broken. "There you are." Nina appeared at her side, slightly breathless from working the room. "Having fun hiding in the corner?" "I'm not hiding," Celeste protested weakly. "I'm observing." And what have you observed?" Before Celeste could answer, she became aware of someone approaching. She turned to find Adrian Blackwell walking directly toward them. Having somehow extracted himself from his admirers, up close, Adrian was even more striking, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were a deep blue and held an intelligence and curiosity that the photographs had never captured. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and unexpectedly gentle. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I couldn't help noticing you seem to be the only person here who isn't trying to get my attention." Nina made a small sound of surprise, but Celeste found herself looking directly into his eyes. "Maybe that's because I actually see you," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "I'm Adrian," he said, extending his hand. "Celeste," she replied, shaking his hand and trying to ignore the way her skin tingled at the contact. "Celeste," he repeated, as if testing how her name sounded. "That's beautiful. It means heavenly, doesn't it?" She was surprised he knew that. "It does. My father chose it. He was an astronomy professor." The question was gentle, without prying. "He passed away a few years ago," she said simply. She wasn't sure why she was sharing this with a stranger, even one as famous as Adrian. "Blackwell, I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "My father was also passionate about the stars. He used to say they reminded him that we're all connected by something larger than ourselves." There was something in his voice, a note of shared understanding that made Celeste feel less alone than she had in years. This wasn't the polished small talk she'd expected from someone in his position. This felt real. "Actually," Adrian said, "I was hoping you might walk with me. There's a quieter gallery upstairs, and I'd love to hear what you think about the Impressionist collection." Nina gave Celeste a little push. "Go," she whispered. "I'll be fine down here." As they walked toward the stairs, Celeste was acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. She heard whispered speculation about who she was, saw the calculating looks from women who clearly thought they deserved Adrian's attention more than she did. "Does it ever get easier?" she asked, as they climbed the marble steps. "Being watched all the time?" "You learn to ignore it," he said, "but it's lonely. Being seen only for what people think you represent rather than who you actually are." They entered a smaller gallery where Monet's water lilies created a peaceful oasis away from the crowd below. The lighting was softer here, more intimate, and they found themselves alone, except for a security guard, who nodded respectfully at Adrian. "This is my favorite piece in the museum," Adrian said, stopping in front of a painting of a garden path dappled with sunlight. "There's something about the way he captured light that makes you feel like you could step right into that moment." Celeste studied the painting, then glanced at him. "You come here often? It's more than most people would expect," he admitted. "I find it peaceful. Museums are one of the few places where I can just be another person appreciating beauty." They moved slowly through the gallery, discussing the paintings with an ease that surprised them both. Adrian knew about art history, but he was more interested in how the pieces made him feel than in showing off his knowledge. Celeste found herself relaxing, forgetting about the expensive dress and the watching eyes downstairs. "What made you want to create technology that connects people?" she asked, as they stood before a Renoir portrait. "It seems like such a personal mission for someone who values privacy." His expression grew thoughtful. "I was a lonely kid. My parents divorced when I was young, and I spent a lot of time moving between houses, never quite feeling like I belonged anywhere. I started programming because computers made sense in a way that people didn't. But as I got older, I realized that technology should bring people together, not isolate them further. And yet here you are, one of the most isolated people at your own charity gala," Celeste observed gently. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The irony isn't lost on me. Success has a way of building walls you never intended to construct." Maybe you just need someone who's not impressed by the walls, she said quietly. He turned to look at her fully, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Is that what you're doing? Not being impressed? I'm seeing you, she said simply. The person who notices light in paintings and remembers that stars connect us all. The person who builds bridges for others but forgets to build them for himself. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence on a bench before a Degas painting of ballet dancers, surrounded by centuries of captured beauty. Celeste felt something shifting inside her, a recognition that this moment was significant in ways she couldn't yet understand. Celeste, Adrian said softly, would you consider having dinner with me sometime? Like somewhere quiet where we can continue this conversation. She looked at him, this man who could have anyone he wanted, who had chosen to spend his evening talking with her about art and loneliness and the spaces between stars. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. I'd like that, she said. As they walked back toward the main gallery, Celeste caught sight of herself in a mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same one who had felt invisible just hours earlier. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer hiding in the background, no longer content to observe life from the sidelines. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single moment of being truly seen, sometimes in learning to see ourselves through someone else's eyes. We discover we were never really invisible at all. The end. Like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. Let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.